Hello, BookTube, and welcome to another weekly reading vlog. On the shelf this week are these four books: The Histories by Herodotus, The Fellowship of the Rings by Tolkien, The Complete Stories of Oz by L. Frank Baum, Ozma of Oz, and Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, and the grammar book, an ESL EFL teacher's course. So it's not been a great reading week for me, to be honest, and we'll get into that in just a second. The page number counts are down. The short answer is I've been busy with a number of things, and I'll just leave it at that rather than getting into too much of my personal life. So, which one to start with? I guess I'll start with The Complete Stories of Oz. Now, Ozma of Oz, I actually finished up the week before, but published my review of that this past Monday, doing a buddy read of the Oz stories with Dane Reads. So you can check out my review. You can go over and check out his review. And then we're into the next book, Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz. So not the Wizard of Oz, but the Wizard in Oz. So this is now the fourth book in the series. And this is where the wizard from the first book, the Wizard of Oz, is now back in the series. So it's Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz. So I've mentioned before that this is actually my second time attempting to get through these Oz books. The first time I read through the first 5 books and started the 6th book, and then lost interest and got distracted by other things. So it's my second time through reading this, but it's something I remember from my first attempt to read it. Just how bizarre I found it. And yeah, I remember thinking the first time I was reading this 5 years ago or something, I'm thinking, it's this reads like some sort of LSD trip from like the 60s or 70s or something like that, the age of psychedelics. It's amazing that this was published way back in 1907 or whatever it was. And then I also remember thinking to myself, well, actually, you're being a little bit unfair here. People can still be creative and imaginative and far out without the use of psychedelics or drugs. But it definitely reads like something really bizarre. I'm everything I say here now, I'm probably going to repeat in 1 week when I publish my video review of it. But then that's the way these weekly reading vlogs work. They overlap heavily with the reviews. So let's get into it a little bit. Dorothy and a boy, Zeb, and a horse, Jim. Whenever I see the name Jim, I always think that's the name of the boy's name, because Jim is such a normal name and Zeb is such a strange name. And I think, well, why did they give the horse the people name and the boy the weird name? I mean, I know Zeb is also a people name, but yeah, I keep the name Jim keeps popping up here, and I keep thinking that's the name of the boy, and oh wait, that's the name of the horse. Okay, so Jim the horse, Zeb the boy, Dorothy the girl, and then the kitten Eureka. Toto is not in this one. Toto is back in Kansas. Dorothy was visiting her relatives in California. They're walking along and then there's an earthquake, and the earth opens, and they get swallowed up, and then they fall through the earth, and then just keep falling down towards the center of the earth. Poor Dorothy. It's just one natural disaster after another. At the end of my last review, I said, okay, so they've established now that there's a magic belt that Ozma and Dorothy can use any time that Dorothy needs to get back to Oz, and there will be no more natural disasters. I forgot that in Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, book number 4, Dorothy gets swallowed up by an earthquake. So book number 1, she's picked up by a cyclone. But book number 2, Dorothy was not in, actually. Somewhat mercifully, maybe. Book number 3, she's washed overboard in the middle of the ocean. Now, book number 4, Dorothy is swallowed by an earthquake, and the earth opens up beneath her. So that they're falling, and they keep falling and falling and falling through the earth. And then, as they're falling, eventually they see a land below them where there are 6 different suns that all are different colors, like a violet sun and a pink sun and a green sun. And then they keep falling, and they go past the suns into a land below where there's, rivers and grass and roads and stuff, and they can see the houses. So there's some sort of land and civilization below. And then they start falling much more slowly, and they get to a land where it turns out that gravity is really not all that strong. And the people can walk up and down through the air. So they land on a house, but then by watching the other people around them, they figure that they can just walk off the house, and then just by walking through the air, get back down to the ground, or by walking through the air, go back up to the house again. They're glass houses, but it's glass that grows. So that there are all these glass things all around them. And it's a vegetable people who live there. And the vegetable people, when they die, they're taken out to the vegetable garden and planted again. And then it sprouts off, and it wasn't entirely clear to me, but it sounds like when they die and get planted, whatever sprouts up isn't exactly the same as what got planted before. So it's kind of like their children sprout out from their dead bodies, but I don't think they exactly come back to life, although that wasn't entirely clear. And there's a sorcerer among the vegetable people. And then the wizard enters. So he also got swallowed up by the earthquake, but he got swallowed up separately, and he comes down in his hot air balloon. So this is the Wizard of Oz, who flew away in the hot air balloon in the first book. And if you remember from the first book, or if you've seen the movie, it's essentially the same character. The original Wizard of Oz is not actually a wizard. He's just a circus performer and illusionist who's able to get everyone to think that he's a wizard. But he's got with him, he does all these magic tricks where he has one piglet and he's able to stretch it out and make it into 2 piglets just by using sleight of hand or something like that. So it's not actually explained in the book how he's doing these tricks, but it's presumed that some sort of sleight of hand because he doesn't have any real magical powers. So he's got these piglets, which are about the size of rats or something like that. And apparently he got them from a traveler who had been to a tiny land, and he had exchanged for them. There are 9 piglets, and because they're in... Well, they're not in Oz, but they're in some sort of fairyland. And I guess the rule is anytime you go into some sort of fairyland, all the animals can talk. This is an inconsistency from the first book, because Toto couldn't talk in the first book. But so Dorothy's kitten Eureka can talk, the horse Jim can talk, and the 9 little piglets can talk. So, yeah, I don't want to talk about this too much because I wanted to get to a couple other books before my 30 minutes are up here. But after having some adventures with the vegetable people, they get walled up into the glass mountain, and they follow a tunnel out to the other side of the mountain where there's this beautiful valley. But if you eat a certain kind of fruit, you become invisible. So all the people who live in that valley are invisible. And that's about as far as I got. So how many pages is that? Well, not that many, as it turns out. About 40 pages. Now the individual stories in this book, the individual books in this volume, are short. So I think I've only got about another 40 pages to go or something. Or maybe a little bit more than that. Looks like I've got about 60 pages to go. But I'll finish this up next week and then post my review, and then Dane should be reading. I think Dane's probably already finished it by now, but we'll be posting our reviews on Monday, a week from tomorrow. Okay, the grammar book. Very little progress on that this week. I was essentially stuck on the exercise questions, which is where I ended last week. My goal is to try and read at least a couple pages every day, but I just did not make this week. In fact, I almost got to the end of the week without having read any of this. But I had previously gone through, I think, a month or a little over a month where I just wasn't reading any of this book. And I thought, okay, I don't want to get back into that. I want to at least chip away at it a little bit every week, if not a little bit every day. So right before I filmed this video, I just did the grammar exercises on that page. So I've got them here, actually. The sentence trees. And all right, is this going to show up? Maybe if I put a book at the back, it won't show through. There's a good possibility that this is going to show up in reverse image on this video. Sometimes the camera does it in reverse and sometimes it doesn't, and I haven't quite figured out what the difference is in terms of setting. But yeah, these are sentence trees I work through at the end of each chapter. So you can do this, and then once you've done it, you can go and check your answers in the back. So, for example, here, go and check your answers in the back. It once you actually sit down and do it, it doesn't take that long, but it does require sitting down for 20 minutes or something in peace, spreading on a clear table with a pen and paper and book, and just being undisturbed for a few minutes while you work your way through this, which in my apartment with the toddler running around is not always guaranteed. So that's another one of my excuses. I have unfortunately completely lost momentum with this book. I've been dragging this out for far too long. Really should have finished it up, but the extended COVID lockdown has not been helping me, because what I would normally like to do with a book like this is maybe take a long lunch break at work, try and work through a chapter a day, do the exercises, stuff like that, and then go back to work and just get it all done at the office. I haven't been to the office now for I don't know how many months. Everything's been teaching from home now since May. So yeah, so it's when I'm at home, I don't make the time for professional development reading as I would if I was in the office, and if the time between work and home was better delineated. So I mean that's one excuse, but the problem is because I've completely lost the momentum, I'm beginning to forget the rules for the sentence trees, and every time I get to the trees at the end of a chapter, I need to go back to previous chapters to remind myself of the rules for this. So these are my attempts, and I compare it to the answers in the back, and I'm making loads of mistakes. For example, I have yesterday here labeled as an adverb, but actually checking my answers in the back, it's a prepositional phrase with a zero preposition. Is how they classify it, which I think I remember learning about in an earlier chapter vaguely, but I've just lost momentum on this. So yeah, here's another one I worked through this afternoon, and then this one. I think actually this one I got mostly right. And then this one was a simpler one. This was just made to test or to exemplify the rules for negative questions. So, can't you wait, or can you non-wait? Can you not wait, but not cannot you wait? So that exemplifies the rules for that. So I finished the exercises, the sentence trees, and then some of the other ones here. Checked all my answers in the back. Then finished off the chapter by looking at the bibliography, see if there were any titles or authors I recognized. A couple authors on here I recognize. Jack Richards, Diane Larsen-Freeman, who's the author of this book. Anyone else? Randall Quirk, who I've not read his stuff but recognize the name. And then next on to chapter 12, imperatives. So until I get to the exercises at the end, I should probably be able to work through a page or two a day on this, maybe. I am really busy, actually, these days with a bunch of stuff. So we'll see how that goes. And then Herodotus. Again, rather pitiful progress this week. Apologies. So I've only made 4 pages through Herodotus, and that's, I guess, partly due to being really insanely busy this past week, and I guess partly due to most of my reading time with the Lord of the Rings. So I think before I started that Lord of the Rings series, I was making much better progress on Herodotus, but the limited leisure reading time I have is going more towards this book now. But as always, there's a ton of interesting stuff in here. What makes it a little bit difficult, or what makes it what prevents me from getting immersed in it, is all the back and forth with the maps and checking Wikipedia and stuff like that, and the footnotes in the back. It's all fascinating stuff, but it's not always relaxing stuff. So, for example, yesterday after I had finished my exercise and finished work and just wanted to relax, I tucked into this book instead of this book. But yeah, it's interesting stuff. It's talking about how Darius, the king of the Persians, after having failed to conquer Scythia, Next set his sights on Libya. Now, what is Libya exactly? I think that's... I don't really understand this. It's part of Africa. And Herodotus... yeah. I guess this is Libya here. This is Egypt. This might show up in reverse image on the camera. The footnotes in the back indicate Herodotus thought of Libya as a second continent. Let's see, where is that? The first map is the world according to Herodotus. Yeah, so this is the world as Herodotus viewed it, with Libya over here and Egypt over here. But then, as Darius is getting ready to invade Libya, Herodotus goes on a digression. And then there's a footnote in the back that says basically, buckle in because this digression is going to go on for a while. What does it say? It says, the onward narrative does not resume until chapter 200. And this is chapter 145. So, I mean, they're short chapters. Chapter in this sense meaning like chapters of the Bible, not like, yeah. So, chapter 200 is on page 334. This is page 314. So, a 20-page digression. So he's talking about, he's got another matter to explain about Libya, and he goes back to talking about Greece, and the Pelasgians drove out the descendants of the Argonauts from Limnos. So, yeah. The Pelasgians pop up in here a few times, but I went to the index to look them up, but didn't really get a good idea of who these Pelasgians are. So I went to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia says they're like a near mythical people who were either the original inhabitants of Greece before the Greeks came, or they were the ancestors of the Greeks. Apparently, the ancient sources must differ. Says that the Greeks themselves regarded them as kind of barbarians. So they go into Limnos and they drive out the descendants of the Argonauts. So the Argonauts, of course, is Jason and the Golden Fleece, and Jason and the Voyage of the Argo, which everyone familiar with Greek mythology, I'm sure recognizes. Although I was actually reading a novelization about this last year, and as I was carrying it around the office, I realized actually how few people were actually familiar with that myth. I'd assumed it was just kind of basic cultural knowledge, but apparently not. Now, I think in a lot of versions of that myth, or at least the ones I've read, the Argonauts all go their separate ways after the voyage ends, and then end up all having separate adventures in different areas. But apparently in Herodotus's version, the Argonauts just settle on Limnos, and then they have descendants who are known as the Minions. And then after the Pelasgians kick them out, they go to Lacedaemon. Now, I'm pretty sure Lacedaemon and the Lacedaemonians are just another name for Sparta. Although I'm not completely sure. Maybe Sparta and the Lacedaemonians are... there's some sort of subtle difference between them. So they arrive, the Minions, who are the descendants of the Argonauts, who've been expelled by the Pelasgians, go there and say, could we settle here? And the Lacedaemonians say okay, because the sons of Tyndareus had sailed on the Argo. Now there's a footnote here, and it says the sons of Tyndareus are Castor and Pollux. But I had this moment where I was like, okay, who is Tyndareus? Was he a king of Sparta? And it's one of those things maybe I should have remembered, because I used to read a lot of Greek mythology when I was young. But I went to Wikipedia again, and yet he was the king of Sparta, I guess. And he had Castor and Pollux were his sons, and then Helen of Troy was his daughter. And I remembered the stories about Helen of Troy and Castor and Pollux, of course. I had forgotten that their father had been the king of Sparta, I guess. So I went to Wikipedia to sort that out. So that is within just within just one paragraph here. I've gone to Wikipedia twice to sort out first who are the Pelasgians, who is Tyndareus. I've been going back to the maps to look at where Libya is and what the difference between Libya and Africa is. And that's one of the reasons why I'm making such slow progress on this. And I ended up only getting 4 pages done. On the other hand, it's interesting stuff for what it is. Like I'm glad I'm reading it. I'm glad I'm learning this. Who knows how much of this I'm going to permanently remember when the book is over. Yeah, interesting stuff, slow progress, I guess. I'm actually going to stop talking about this here, even though I've only been talking about one paragraph out of the 4 pages I read, because I try and keep these weekly reading vlogs under 4 minutes, and still want to talk about the Fellowship of the Rings. So when I started the Lord of the Rings box set, I made a long, rambling video, which was essentially a long apology for having given up on this book, on this series, 20 years ago, and not having read it since then. Getting back into it, well, yeah, first of all, there's a lot of prologue. There's notes on the text, which I was reading last week, and then there's notes on the 50th anniversary edition, which talks about some of the text again and some of the reprintings and more textual history. And then there's foreword to the 2nd edition by Tolkien. With all this preamble, I thought maybe they could include Tolkien's foreword to the 1st edition as well, just for the sake of completeness. But apparently Tolkien wanted his foreword to the 2nd edition to replace the one to the 1st edition. I think the 2nd edition came out in the 60s or something. And then there's a prologue, which I guess is part of the main text or something like that. But it's written in like a scholarly style. And I was thinking to myself, oh boy, this is going to be a slog. But then the prologue ends and the book 1 begins. And it's much readable when you get to much more readable when you get to the first part of the book. Sorry, a little bit of a distraction over there. When the story proper starts in book 1, then it reads like a modern novel and is very readable. And in fact, it's been so readable that I've been thinking to myself, why is it taking me this long to finally get to this book? I mean, I had friends who read it back in middle school, and it's perfectly readable. I don't know why it's taken me this long to get into it. I think what it is after having failed to get through it the first time, I just made it into this big thing in my head, this huge mental block. But it's perfectly pleasant to read. It's perfectly easy to understand. The prose flows. It's perfectly readable. It is, however, I'm up to page 90 so far, and they're still in the Shire. The journey hasn't started yet. And I think maybe this was 20 years ago. One of the things that tried my patience maybe was the slow pace at which the plot was moving. But now that I'm older and know a little bit more about Tolkien, I have a greater appreciation for what he's trying to do in terms of building atmosphere rather than a plot that is moving and developing and setting up character arcs and stuff like that. So and the atmosphere in here is good. It's fun to read. So 90 pages into it, they're still in the Shire. The story hasn't really kicked off yet, but it's good fun to read. And 90 pages is good for me, especially on a week like this. All right, so that's all for this week. I'm not sure if next week is going to be much better in terms of reading, to be honest. It looks like it's shaping up to be another busy week, but whatever reading I do or do not get done, I'll report on it next week.